Okay, so we've talked about materials, and now we're going to take a kind of a, not really a step back, more a step to the side, and talk about lights and then cameras, and then also rendering, I think. But again, we're keeping it pretty surface level because this is only week 6 after all. So we're going to start with lights. Lights are important because if you don't have light in your scene, you don't have anything you can visibly render. It'll just be black. The way you add a light is the same way you add anything else. From object mode, you just hit Shift A or you go to the Add menu, and there's a light section, and you have 4 options: point, sun, spot, and area. I don't use point light very often because point light isn't really a physically accurate light, because point light literally emanates from a single point, whereas anything in real life has at least some size to it. But once you add a light, it's a good idea to name it, but I'll leave it at point for now. We can go down to our light options, or object data properties, so it's the green light bulb will pop up. And here are the options we have. So you see it's a lot simpler than the materials. There is a preview. You can kind of see what it would look like on an empty checkerboard floor, or chessboard if you prefer. And we have a color option. We have power, so this is the intensity, the brightness of the light. We have size, so actually this is probably a really nice thing about the point, why the point source is better than it used to be, is now we have a size option. Max bounces, so how many times does the light bounce around the scene, which is how many times Blender calculates that light path when it renders. And then do you want the light to cast shadows, and multiple importance, reduces noise for area lights, and sharp glossy materials. So it's just like more detail. And there's a node option we're not going to worry about. So that's really all we have. And if we can actually change the type of light just by clicking here in the properties. So we have a sunlight, a spot, and an area. So we'll go through them all individually. You can see for the most part the options are the same. Area has a couple more. Sun's a little bit different, but not too much. But we'll start with point light. Color works the same way as anything else. You've got white light, or you can kind of change that to whatever you want. There is a list if you want to be physically accurate to color temperatures. There is a list I can post. You can also just Google it, of converting color temperatures to RGB values or hex values. And then you can get specific color temperatures if that's something that you really want. But let's go with like a warmer light here. And then to actually see it in our scene, if I go to my material preview, by default, it's not going to show you anything. Okay? And that's because Blender by default in material preview is using one of these HDRI images. So all we have to do is turn on scene lights, and it's not going to show anything because it's not bright enough yet. I'm also going to turn off or turn scene world on, and I can go to my world settings real quick, and I'm just going to set this to black just to completely minimize anything else happening. Okay, so just world tab, color black. That's it. Go back to my light bulb, and we don't see anything because it's not bright enough. So I'm going to bring the power up to, you can see we can try 100. You can start to get something. Okay. Actually looks kind of cool. Point source. Its light is going out in all directions from this object. We can move it around, and we get real-time preview, which is awesome. Let me make sure that we are in cycles. Yes, we are. Good. We can also go into full rendered view, and it doesn't look too different. Blender does a really good job of previewing this live. You can go, if you want to go even brighter, you can go to 1,000 watts. There we go. And now we have, instead of just like a little candle, now we have like a enormous torch or something. Again, we can change the size of it. And the size, you will notice, if we look at the shadows, the size will determine how hard those shadows are. So if I bring the size really small, you can see how hard that shadow is. Okay, but if I bring that size up, and now it's a much softer shadow. Okay. Same thing is in real life. If you want to soften a shadow, you increase the size of the source. All right, so that's a point light. Next, let's change this to a sun lamp. Actually, instead of that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide the point light. So I'm just going to click the little eye in the outliner. And I'm going to add a new sun. And I'm just going to do this because it's going to give me the default settings. And the sun behaves a little bit differently. And that's... The main way is that the sun's location does not matter. Okay? Because the idea is that this is representing our actual sun. And the sun is so far away that it's... like, it basically creates light coming from one direction everywhere, right? It's a parallel light source. So the only thing that matters with the sun is the rotation. And as you rotate it, you can see the shadows get longer, but I can move it around and no difference. I'll go back into material preview. As I move it around, there is no difference. Doesn't matter where it goes. Rotation is the only thing that matters. Well, in like strength and color, but that's it. So maybe you wanted to go like a moonlight sort of thing. Maybe it's a full moon. Okay, you can do that. You can dial that strength back if you want something kind of subtle. All right. Sun is a hard source. There isn't any kind of size or softening value. So you would either use a different source or you would want to put the light through something else. Like in real life, what you would do is you'd put up some diffusion, a flag or a silk or something like that. But in 3D, at least in Blender, it's probably better just to use probably a different source would be the better option. Yeah, because the idea is that it's representing the sun, which is in effect a point source from very far away, so it will always be hard edges. So that's the sun lamp. I'm going to add another. I'm going to hide that one, and then I'm going to add in a spotlight. I'm going to go into solid view here just so I can see what's going on. I'll move it up vertically. Okay, and so a spotlight is, I think we all have a pretty intuitive sense of what a spotlight is, right? It is a directional light. Okay, so light isn't going everywhere; it's just going in this cone. And let me turn the power up. I'm going to go to, let's try 500. Okay, and we'll move it back a little bit. Actually, let's put it over here just to make this barrel stand out a little bit. Okay. So let's look at the values here. We have color again. I'll leave that at white. We have power, so the intensity. We have size. So this is, again, we can make the shadows softer or harder here, just like with the point light. By the way, if you want to go back to the default, just right-click on the field, and you can reset to the default value. And then we have our max bounces there. Although with a spotlight, you also have a couple other options down lower. We have the size, so this is the angle of the cone. So you can make it a really wide spotlight. You can make it really kind of narrow, if you were going for something maybe more theatrical. And then we have this blend value, and the blend is going to be how hard the edges of the spotlight are. So by default, it's 0.15 and go all the way down to 0, and that's a perfectly hard edge. So that is very much a theatrical stage spotlight. Something like an ellipsoidal or a Lico, if you're familiar with theater or film lighting. And then if we bring the blend all the way up to 1, now we have a very soft fall off there, which is, I think, a rather pleasing look. Maybe I'll warm this up a little bit, just because. Okay. And this one, both location and rotation matter, perhaps unsurprisingly. Maybe we'll just rotate this back a little bit and move it over. Okay. So there is our spotlight. I'll go on top view. Okay. And we can see the rendered view too. It's going to look, of course, very similar. Okay. All right, I'm going to hide that one. And then we have one more light. And that is the area light. And I use the area light a ton. So area light is, by default, it's a plane, it's a square that's pointing direction or emitting directional light. So I'll bring the power up to, I'll go 500 again, and I'll go back into my material preview view. Okay. So you see there's a lot of light coming out of this area because it's emitting light from every area on this plane, basically. But only in one direction. So if I bring it down and rotate it, you can see how that's working. We've got color again. We have shape now. So shape, we have square, rectangle, and we can change our size that way. Okay. We also have a disc, so a circle, and an ellipse, which is an oval. I think rectangle is probably the one I use the most often, but they all work well. And that's really the only thing we need to worry about here. We have this portal option, which will guide sampling of the background. We're not going to worry about that. So those are the 4 lights. And then obviously you can use them all together to create different effects. I'm going to move that one out of the way so we can kind of see. Actually, I use area lights a lot for like kind of side light sort of things. So if I rotate this around and maybe I make the Y a little bit larger. A nice area light. If I hide the point again, you see it gives a really nice quality of light. It wraps around in a pleasing way. If you're doing like product stuff, this would be a great thing to use. Oops. Let's see, what is it? Y? Yeah, there we go. Okay, you get very pleasing stuff. This is, excuse me. This is like something you would use for portrait light as well, or for portraits. So those are the lights. And now that you have the lights, we need to figure out what exactly that we're going to see and what we need to light. So that requires adding a camera. So we need to add a camera now. By default, there is a camera in the scene, but I keep deleting it because it's in the way for what we've done up to this point. But now we need a camera. And so since there is not one currently in the scene, I'm going to first go to solid view. And I'm going to, you can either go to add in camera or hit Shift A and add a camera. So that'll pop into the scene. And I'm just going to move it up here. So if we look at our camera options, there's definitely more to play with here. And I'm not going to go through all of this right now. I really just want to focus on how to get the camera where you want it to be. And then changing the focal length, so basically zooming, and adding some depth of field, because depth of field is nice and pretty and makes your renders better. So first thing is I've got a camera in our scene. How do we look at it? You hit number pad 0. Oops, make sure your mouse is in the viewport. But number pad 0 is going to take you to the camera view. If, for some reason, you have multiple cameras in your scene, like I now do, and I hit number pad 0, it's going to take me to this one, but what if I want it to be on the other one? Well, in that case, what you need to do is go to Object, no, not Object, that's a lie, View, Cameras, and set Active Object as Camera. So you select whatever camera you want to be active. You see the shortcut is Command number pad 0, or you can just go to View, Cameras, set Active Object as Camera, and it'll take you to that one. So it's whatever one is active, and as you're going through your renders, you'll have multiple cameras. That's how you can move between them. Delete that. But for now, I just want to focus on this camera. And to start, we want to figure out how do we get the camera where we want it to be. If you don't have a number pad, you can, I don't think you can go through there. Oh, you can. You can click on this little camera icon in the viewport. Will take you to your camera view. You can also, I believe it's the tilde, which is the key directly above the left tab. Well, I guess it's just tab. There's only one tab on the keyboard now. You can get to your view camera there. So either of those options will take you there. I think you can also get through the view. Yeah, the view menu, viewpoint, camera will also take you to the camera's view. So once you have your camera selected and active, now we need to move the camera in place. So one way that you can do it is just kind of manually positioning it and moving it around like you would any other object. So maybe I go into top view with number pad 7 and kind of move the camera over here, and maybe I rotate it a little bit, something like that. Okay, maybe I do something like that. You can even go into view area, toggle quad view, and kind of see it from multiple angles. I can even, in the perspective view, hit number pad 0, so I can see my camera view in that view and then move it around from different angles. Okay. That's kind of a slower way to do it. So I'm going to go back to toggle quad view off. Here's how I like a couple ways that you, hold on. Here's the way that I will do it. Is I'm going to just kind of generally get my viewport where I would think an interesting camera angle would be. So let's say like here. And then you can go to View, Align View, whoops, View, Align View, Align Active Camera to View. See, the shortcut is Alt Command number pad 0 on Mac. On Windows, it's Control Alt number pad 0. But if you have trouble remembering those key commands, I understand. It took me a while to remember those, but it's in the View menu, View, Align Active Camera to View. And that's going to snap the camera to whatever your viewport is looking at right now. Okay? That's a really fast way to get pretty close. From there, if you want to tweak your camera, in the view, you can hit G to move it, right? And you can move your camera around. You can hit X to constrain it to the X-axis, whatever you want. You can also, if this is more comfortable for you, if you hit N to bring up your properties in the viewport, right? It's also this little arrow that's sticking out here. Okay. Go to the View menu, and we have this Lock Camera to View. As soon as you turn that on, you can get this red border around your camera, and now you can move your camera with the same controls that you would orbit your viewport normally. Okay, so middle click and drag will orbit your camera around. Shift middle click will pan it, and then Control middle click will zoom it in and out. Well, actually, it will move it. It won't zoom it. It'll dolly it in and out. Okay, so you can kind of use that to get fine-tuned control over exactly what you want your camera to be looking at. Okay, and once you're done, you can turn off Lock Camera to View. And now that's gone. Okay, so that's how you can get your camera kind of in place. There's two other things that I want to focus on here. First is going to be focal length. So this is the lens that's on your camera. If you're at all familiar with photography, videography, anything like that, that's what this is. You can see it's even in millimeters. So by default, it's a 50 millimeter. 50 or like 35 millimeters is a pretty standard length. If you want to go really wide angle, you can go like 24. You could even go 14. It's going to start getting really fisheye-y. Right, so it's going to get really distorted if you're at 14. You could go the other way. Like 85 is more of like a portrait lens. You go 135 for like a really long lens, because even the camera stretches out. All right, I'm going to keep it at 35 because I like 35 millimeter lenses. Yeah. So the last thing for cameras, and again, we're going to skip over a lot of this, is this depth of field option. So first I'm going to go into material preview so we can see the results of this. I'm going to click the checkbox here to turn that on. And I think I also need to tell my preview to use depth of field. Maybe I don't. I guess not. Okay. Oh no, I don't. I just need to actually increase the effect. So with depth of field on, we need to tell it what to focus on, and then we also need to tell it like what the f-stop is. So the f-stop is effectively going to control how noticeable the effect is. Okay, without getting too much into how cameras work. The smaller the number, the more obvious the depth of field effect, right? The shallower the field of view. So if I go to 1, I also need to, I'm going to go into quad view for this so you can kind of see what's happening. And I'm going to hide that. Hit N. There we go. All right. So here's our camera view, and then we have a top view, a front, and a side view. I'm going to go to my viewport display section here in the camera, and I'm going to turn on limits. And that's going to give me this line that tells me where the camera's pointing, and this yellow crosshair. That's my depth of field. That's what I'm focused on. Okay, so I'm going to bring this distance in, and now I'm focused. You can see it's coming in, and now I'm focused at the barrel. Okay. So we'll go back to, we'll toggle the quad view. All right, I'll try to zoom in here so you can really see this. So you can see the barrel is in focus. The barrel, there's 7 barrels in here. I need to be more specific. The close barrel is in focus. The stack of barrels and this lone barrel off in the distance are out of focus. And the one in the background is even more out of focus. If I bring this f-stop even lower, let's say like 0.2, now we have only like this one plank on the barrel is in focus. Everything else is out of focus. And the one in the back is, you can't even tell is a barrel. All right, I can go the other way. If I go up to like 5.6, now most things are in focus. This is maybe slightly out of focus, but it's extremely minimal. You know, for something like this, I might go like, you can try 1.8. I don't want to go too extreme with it. Let's try 1.4. 1 might actually be good for this one. Okay, something like that. You can also adjust the number of blades if you want. It's not going to have a huge difference, but it will affect how the out of focus parts are, the bokeh is calculated. But really you only need to worry about f-stop and distance, and then you can turn on limits so you can see again what you're focused on. So I can kind of orbit around. Let's say I want to focus on this stack of barrels. Then I'm just going to drag out my distance until that crosshair is relatively even with those barrels. I'm going to hit number pad 0 to go back into camera view. And now these barrels are in focus. The close one is out of focus. And if I bring this f-stop down, that far one is going to be out of focus too. Okay? So that's, you know, that's the real quick and dirty with cameras. Depth of field before we move on to rendering is, you do have this focus object, and what you can do is you can set an object to be what it focuses on. So if I select my camera again and I go to focus object, I can either, I've got, you know, a list of everything in my scene, or I can just click this eyedropper tool and then click on any object in the scene. I'll say that one, and now I'm going to focus on that. Or I want to focus on this one. Okay, and it will adjust the focus accordingly. So you have those options as well for depth of field. All right, so now let's talk about, we've got our lights, we've got our materials, we have our camera in place. Now we just need to hit render. Well, how do we render in Blender? First thing, I know I mentioned this before, but we want to be using cycles. At least for now, we're going to be rendering with cycles. Okay, so this second tab down is our render properties. We want to make sure cycles is what we have. We're going to be, I guess for now, using CPU computing because I don't know what the graphics cards are in these computers. So we're going to keep it on CPU. We don't have to worry too much about most of these options, at least for now. But we will focus on, right here, the sampling. So this is going to be the quality of your render. If we keep it really low, so like the viewport right now is rendered at 32 samples. So I go to rendered view. I'm actually going to turn this really low. So I'm going to go to 8 samples. Okay. So at 8 samples, we get super grainy results. And this is terrible. We don't want that. If we increase that, let's say to 64, you'll see it'll keep going. And it takes obviously more time, but it'll keep going and it'll get less grainy and less grainy and less grainy. You can have 2 different values. You can have one for just the viewport preview, and you can have one for the final render. So your viewport preview, I might keep the viewport at like 128. That's roughly what I do at home. And then your render can be much higher. And I like to go in powers of 2. So I might do like 1024. And 1024 will definitely be enough for this scene. But what you can do is, as you render, you can kind of adjust things, and I'll show you how to kind of hone in on that number as we go. The last thing I want to call out, though, before we do hit render, actually, there's probably 2 things. I don't know if ambient occlusion is going to... No, we don't want that. Get rid of that. So in the... See, this is the layer properties. Yeah. In the view layer properties, we've got this denoising option. You can turn that on, and that'll kind of save you from having to crank up the samples super high. Instead of, like, for me, it saves some of my renders from having to go to 2048. I can render at just 1024 samples. I'm not going to worry about any of the settings in that. We're just going to leave it at the default. So that's in the layer properties, which is this one. If we go up one, this is the last bit that we need to concern ourselves with. So we have resolution. By default, we're at 1920 by 1080, which is HD. That's what we're going to be rendering in. For probably everything in this class, we're going to keep it here. But if you wanted to go, let's say you wanted to do a 4K render, well, you can then type in your 3840 by 2160. Okay, and now it's going to do a 4K render. The frame is the same because Blender is kind to that way. You don't have to reframe your shot because you changed resolutions. But it will render 4K, which will take at least twice as long. So I'll go back to 1920 by 1080. So that's where you set your resolution. If you were rendering an animation, this is where you would set your frame start and stop. In a few weeks, probably a month and a half, probably a month, we'll get back to rendering with animation in mind. So I'm going to skip over this. And then we have our file format. So we're going to stick with PNG, RGBA, so alpha, so it's going to have a transparency channel. Color depth is going to be 8. We're going to turn the compression down. We don't need that. Then we can go back to render. There's one last thing that I almost forgot that might hang you up. So you need to go to this film section and turn on transparent. If you don't do that, you won't render with transparency. So you need to make sure this transparent is enabled. If you have glass in your scene, it doesn't hurt to check transparent glass as well. So once you have all of those things set, okay, again, you can go through and double check. We have render engine is cycles, device is CPU. We've got a high number of render samples. In the film section, we have transparent enabled and transparent glass. In the scene settings, we've got our resolution is set, our file format is set to PNG, RGBA, and no compression. And then in our layer options, we have denoising turned on. There's a lot of little things here and there, but if you hit those high points, you'll get a decent render. Now, we need to hit render. To do that, you go to the render menu, and you hit render image. You can also hit F12 if you prefer key commands. You do that, this second window, this is actually a second window, will open up, and it will start rendering your scene. And it'll render it in these tiles. And the number of tiles will be based on how many cores your CPU has. You can see the tiles rendering up here. You can see how long it's taken to denoise. You can also go to your view and change your zoom. Okay, so you can kind of see the whole thing if you want. And this will go through and this will render, and it's got an estimate, so this is going to be like an 8-minute render, which is kind of a long time for a scene that's just a handful of barrels and some lights. Okay, so the samples they might be a little higher than they need to be. They probably are. But kind of keep that in mind as you're figuring out how long it's going to take your scenes to render, and how, as you start adding more lights and adding more advanced materials, this render time can creep up. So just be prepared for that. It's also taking a while because I'm recording the screen at the same time. But now it's speeding up because it's getting to the transparent parts, so that'll affect it. It'll go through, and you can, once you're done with this render, you can take a moment to look it over, make sure there's not too much noise, make sure everything is smooth, and then you just hit image and save as, and you can save that image out. So I'm going to let this render, and then we'll move on to the next thing. It's complete. I'm pretty happy with the sample, so I don't have to go back and re-render anything. So I'm going to go to image and save as, and I'm just going to call this barrel scene. Okay, and that's good. Save as image. All right, the very last step to turning in a finished product is going to be to open Photoshop, and we're just going to composite a very simple gradient background into it. So I don't know what any of this is, but we will open our barrel scene. So we saved it as PNG because that's got an alpha channel. So we just need to add a new layer, right? And we can go to our gradient tool, and I'm going to do a radial gradient, and you can choose any of the defaults or you can make your own. Let's say, let's do this. Okay, there we go. No. Let's go with, like, I guess we'll do like a blue gradient maybe. Actually, that works. Okay, and then you just kind of draw your gradient. And there's still some transparency there, which I'm not thrilled about. Let's actually try going like this way maybe. Let's reverse that. Nah, I don't like any of that. I hate it all so much. Okay, well, something like that. Whatever you decide on your background, just keep it simple, keep it clean, non-distracting, right? Things like that. And then once you have that, then it's just file, export. I like save for web because it gives me some options, but you can just save it as a JPEG. I like to go maximum quality because why not? It's just an image. It's not going to take up that much space. Keep the image size by default, and then you can save out your final version. Click Save. And then there you have your final barrel scene. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. 1 wide shot and 3 close-ups for your scenes. And you will be good.